You stand at the water's edge, the moon painting the Bosphorus in silver deceit. The air tastes of jasmine and salt, yet beneath it lingers something metallic, the smell of blood not yet spilled. Somewhere, silk whispers against stone as a figure is led toward the pier, her footsteps careful, as though not to wake the sea that will soon swallow her name. Before we begin, take a breath. Tell me, where in the world are you watching from? I'm always moved by how this history unites us. Voices from Jakarta to Johannesburg, from Istanbul itself to small towns that never make the maps. If you're here, you're part of a global circle that refuses to forget. So, like this video, subscribe, and let's descend together into the empire's most forbidden night. The palace slept under the illusion of peace. Above, domes glistened under a calm sky. Below, torches flickered where the corridors twisted into shadows. It was the reign of Sultan Murad IV, a ruler both feared and adored, whose word could raise an empire or erase a dynasty. In these years, the empire's beauty and cruelty were indistinguishable, both clothed in silk, both perfumed in rosewater. At the water gate of Topkapi, 6 men waited in silence. They were Kapıcılar, the palace gatekeepers, their faces blank as parchment. One carried a coarse hemp sack, freshly soaked so it would not tear. Another tied iron weights with rope the color of dried blood. "For the purity of the harem," the chief muttered, reciting the phrase that turned murder into order. The woman they brought forward was young, 17, maybe 18, her eyes red from sleepless pleading. She was accused of treason, of passing a letter to a visiting envoy. No trial, no defense. The order came stamped with the Sultan's tugra, a curling emblem of divine will. Çuval cezası, the decree read, the sack sentence. From the shadowed archway, a scribe watched, ink freezing mid-letter. His record would later appear in the palace register. 3 concubines disposed of by water, on account of discord and disloyalty. The words bled neat and cold across the page. The empire's bureaucracy had no room for trembling hands. Outside, the sea waited, black, infinite, and patient. The sack crackled as the woman was forced inside, her cries muffled by fabric. "Forgive me," she gasped, though none replied. The chief executioner whispered a prayer to Allah for the Sultan's justice, then signaled with a nod. The rope tightened. The splash came next, soft and final. For a long while, no one moved. The men bowed their heads. Not in guilt, in ritual. Above them, the palace lanterns trembled in the wind like fading stars. How many such nights unfolded unseen? Venetian ambassadors wrote of it in secret dispatches that the waters near Seraglio Point often whispered at dawn, as if exhaling the sins of the court. Fishermen claimed they found embroidered slippers tangled in their nets, still scented faintly with amber. But these whispers were dangerous. Speaking of them aloud could invite the same fate. The harem was both sanctuary and prison. Within its latticed windows lived hundreds. Women who had once been daughters, sisters, brides of forgotten villages. Some became mothers to sultans. Others became names erased from ledgers. To the empire, they were living symbols, property measured in virtue and obedience. And when either wavered, the Bosphorus became their confessor. Historians later unearthed fragments of these executions in imperial ledgers, a chilling marriage between faith and arithmetic. Each death bore a receipt, the cost of the sack, the iron weights, the wages for the rowers who ferried the condemned beyond sight of the palace. Every soul was itemized like a purchase, every silence accounted for in ink. One survivor's account, preserved in a 17th-century Greek manuscript, described a miracle. She had been bound for drowning but escaped when the rowboat overturned in a storm. "The sea," she wrote, "chose to carry me, not claim me." She lived the rest of her life in an island convent, her tongue burned to ensure her silence. By the 18th century, the ritual of sack executions became less frequent, not because the empire grew merciful, but because its cruelty had refined itself. Poison replaced water, exile replaced suffocation. Yet the Bosphorus, ever loyal, held its secrets. Divers centuries later found remnants of silk belts and iron rings embedded in the riverbed silt, untouched by time. Even now, when fog drifts over the strait, locals swear the air carries faint rhythmic echoes. Not waves, but the sound of fists against fabric, pleading through the sack's coarse weave. The Bosphorus remembers, an old fisherman once said, his eyes tracing the current. It never gives back what the palace throws away. Above the city, dawn begins to stir. The call to prayer trembles through the minarets, a voice asking for mercy across a skyline built by unnumbered hands. Some free, many not. The same water that reflected the empire's glory still hides its victims beneath. And as the first light touches the palace domes, the surface of the Bosphorus ripples. Once, twice, as though something below has finally sighed. The wind carries the faint scent of roses and salt, and the city wakes again, unaware that it is haunted. The night has passed, but the water still breathes. The corridors beneath Topkapi were colder than death. Torches hissed against the damp walls, throwing light over rivets and rings embedded in stone. The air trembled with the scent of rust, incense, and human breath gone stale from years of captivity. Few in the empire spoke of these chambers, and fewer still knew their names. The scribes called it Demir Cafes, the iron cage, though it was less a cage than a philosophy, that fear could be forged stronger than any blade. No map marks its place. No historian of the Sultan's court dared record its design. But whispers persisted, from eunuchs who carried trays that clinked with chains, from janissaries who guarded doors that led to nowhere. The cage, they said, was built not to kill swiftly, but to unmake a person piece by piece until the silence itself became obedience. It began with the sound. Iron scraping on iron, a groan that rolled through the bowels of the palace like the breath of a sleeping beast. Prisoners said it came before dawn prayers, as if the cage stirred when the world was most forgiving. Inside, the air was heavy enough to taste, thick with oil smoke and the faint tang of sweat. Hooks hung from the ceiling, each polished smooth by years of use. In one corner stood a brazier, its coals whispering orange. One Venetian diplomat, Giacomo de' Rossi, claimed to have seen the cage during his embassy in 1588. His letters, smuggled out of the empire and later translated in Florence, described a chamber beneath the Sultan's library, where certain women, accused of poisoning or treachery, were kept not for death, but for memory, that their voices might remain in the walls as a warning. Rossi's description lingered in the archives, dismissed for centuries as exaggeration, until excavations beneath Topkapi in the 20th century uncovered a vaulted room lined with iron lattice and scorched stone. Ottoman judicial records confirm at least 2 such imprisonments under Sultan Mehmed III. One, a concubine named Leyla Hatun, was accused of conspiring with a rival vizier. She was not executed. Her beauty was said to have stayed the Sultan's hand, but confined within the Demir cafes. Court scribes recorded that she was given bread and water for each day of repentance and silence for each night of reflection. Her name appears no more after that year. The cell was both punishment and sermon. Women of the harem were brought there to witness what awaited betrayal. Sometimes a muezzin was ordered to recite verses from the Quran above the chamber, so that mercy might echo down the stone even as the flesh below trembled. One scholar later wrote that the juxtaposition was intentional, to remind the condemned that God's compassion was infinite, but the Sultan's was not. The machinery of control was delicate, almost theatrical. Pain was measured, rationed, aestheticized. A lash too soon could turn the act into rebellion. A scream too long could spoil the illusion of divine justice. The goal was not to destroy, but to mold, to make the condemned believe their suffering was necessary, even sacred. "Be still," One warden is recorded as saying to a trembling captive, "In stillness, your sins cool." His words, copied into the testimony of an escaped servant decades later, ring with the empire's moral paradox: cruelty disguised as purification. By candlelight, scribes chronicled these ordeals in the same ink used for tax decrees and marriage contracts. Every act of torment had its paperwork. The empire ran on documentation, an archive of agony folded neatly between pages of law. And yet, through all the rules and rituals, one question persisted like a fever. When punishment becomes performance, does justice survive? Centuries later, archaeologists descending into those tunnels found traces that blurred myth and evidence: rusted shackles fused to rock, burn marks shaped like outstretched hands, fragments of combs carved from bone. The air still carried the scent of ash, faint but unmistakable. As one researcher noted, the silence down there felt inhabited. Legends tell that some women endured for months, their minds breaking before their bodies. When a prisoner finally ceased to speak or move, the chamber attendants wrapped her in linen, carried her through the tunnels to the Bosphorus, and released her under moonlight, not unlike those who had met the Chuval Chesase. The water received both the defiant and the devout without distinction. Outside, the palace glittered. Tulip gardens, musicians, fountains shaped like pomegranates spilling water over marble. Above ground, the empire's elegance gleamed for foreign eyes, a theater of culture masking its foundation of fear. The same courtiers who toasted to enlightenment by day ordered silence by night. The same ink that wrote poetry also wrote death warrants. Even now, if one walks the eastern perimeter of Topkapi at dusk, the air dips colder for a moment, a sharpness that locals call the breath of the cage. Tour guides speak of drafts or groundwater, but the old janitors know better. "It sighs," one of them said, when asked by a researcher in 1971. "It sighs when someone lies about the past." The empire is gone, the iron rusted, the ledgers yellowed. Yet somewhere beneath the marble courtyards, a corridor still runs, ending in a door sealed with cement. No one has opened it in 100 years. But sometimes, when the torches in the palace flicker for no reason, the guards still murmur a prayer, not for the dead, but for the walls that remember them. Because beneath the gold and glory, beneath every empire's hymn to God and order, there remains the echo of iron, flesh, and silence. The first hammer blow rang out at dawn. Dust unfurled like incense, turning the sunlight that slanted into Topkapi's east wing into a golden haze. The men thought they were repairing a decorative partition, another idle restoration ordered by the new republic eager to scrub the palace clean of its imperial ghosts. But as the plaster gave way, something small and white tumbled into the light. It was not marble. It was a finger bone. By mid-morning, there were more. Tiny fragments, brittle as old ivory, embedded between bricks laid centuries before. When the foreman struck one wall with the butt of his chisel, the limestone split to reveal the curve of a jaw. Its teeth cracked from pressure, its mouth forever open. For a long time, no one spoke. Then the youngest among them whispered, "She tried to scream through the stone." What they had uncovered was not mere architecture, but evidence of a punishment once whispered about in palace corridors. Duvar Chesase, the walling sentence. To be sealed alive within the Sultan's domain was the ultimate decree of erasure. No blood spilled, no executioner's cry, just silence, built layer by layer. Ottoman chroniclers wrote around it, never through it. In their elegant calligraphy, the phrase appeared only in euphemism: banished beyond remembrance, or given to the stone. Yet fragments endured in the margins of forbidden texts, in Venetian spy letters smuggled across the Adriatic, in the memoir of a terrified Greek stonemason who once worked at the palace. Together, they painted a cruelty so deliberate it ceased to be punishment. It was theology rewritten in mortar and flesh. The 1924 discovery shook Istanbul's academic circles. Some historians claimed the remains were plague victims, sealed away to prevent contagion. Others suggested hurried burials during sieges. But among the artifacts was something impossible to rationalize: a thin copper tablet etched with the name Aishi Hatun, and beneath it the Sultan's tugra, his imperial cipher drawn with the sweeping finality of law. Ottoman legal records from the 17th century speak of penalties of enclosure for betrayal of sacred trust. The words are clinical, the meaning ambiguous. But one Venetian envoy, writing to the Doge in 1611, described a woman entombed behind a wall within the Sultan's gardens, so that her breath might perish before her flesh. For decades, scholars dismissed it as propaganda, until the bones began to speak. Imagine the ritual. A narrow alcove carved within the foundation, just wide enough for a human body. The condemned woman stood within, wrists bound with silk cords so she could not claw too quickly. A mullah recited a prayer, not for the soul's departure, but for purification, as though the act were cleansing the empire of contagion. Then came the masons. The sound of trowels and wet mortar filled the air, a rhythm steady as a dirge. One by one, bricks closed in the light. The final stone was placed at heart level, where the muffled beat had slowed to silence. No screams were recorded, but palace servants told stories. They claimed that at night the walls of the harem breathed. The marble panels cooled too quickly, and the air near them smelled faintly of copper and perfume. Poets wrote of women turned to walls whose hearts beat in limestone. The empire denied these tales, yet the ledgers of execution kept careful count, numbers that did not match the official burials. In the years following the 1924 discovery, the new republic wanted none of it. The Ottoman past was already a wound. Reopening it risked infection. So the findings were catalogued in silence. Files labeled structural irregularities were locked in archives, their contents sealed. But in one archaeologist's private notes, a line survived. Bones discovered in Section 7. Fingers flattened, consistent with pressure from within. Beside the line, a crude drawing. A wall cross-section, annotated, interior cavity, 1.2 meters deep. Requests from European scholars poured in for excavation rights. Each was denied. Officially, the site was unstable. Unofficially, those few who entered reported strange acoustics. A cough echoed from nowhere. Footsteps followed too close, and once, so one Italian conservator swore, she heard faint tapping, rhythmic, deliberate, from inside the plaster. The question that haunted them was not merely who these victims were, but why. Treason, infidelity, or something more dangerous, a refusal to obey. In a court where beauty was currency and obedience was survival, defiance had to be erased so thoroughly that even memory could not resurrect it. Public executions stained reputation. This was cleaner, secret, absolute. An elderly mason, interviewed in 1939, remembered his grandfather's tale from the reign of Ibrahim I, known as the Mad Sultan. 5 women vanished from the harem one night. The next morning, new marble panels gleamed along the courtyard walls. The stones were warm, he said. For 3 days they steamed when touched. Could it be myth? Perhaps. But myth, like mortar, hardens around truth. At night, the eastern wing of Topkapi still stands silent, closed to visitors. Guards claim it's due to structural fragility. Yet one, when pressed, admitted something stranger. The air feels wrong there, as if the walls are breathing in when you breathe out. During restoration in 1952, engineers installed a listening device, an experiment to detect air pockets or cracks within the foundation. What it captured instead were irregular vibrations. Not seismic, not mechanical. Pulses, every 12 seconds. When the frequency was amplified, the sound resembled shallow breath. The report was buried. Some blamed superstition. Others whispered about resonance, sound trapped within stone, echoing centuries later. But Istanbul's older residents know another truth, that history buried alive never rests quietly. And then there's the story of Kemal Erdin, one of the 1924 workers. Ordered to rebury the remains beneath the courtyard, he defied the foreman. From the rubble he kept a single piece, a small segment of bone, pale and polished smooth by pressure. He placed it on his windowsill where sunlight struck it each morning. His neighbors called it macabre. He called it a witness. When Erdin died in 1956, his daughter found the bone still there, untouched by time, though the window had long been left open to rain. She buried it behind their house near Üsküdar, under an apricot tree. But some nights she swore she heard tapping on the glass, faint as breath against a mirror. The empire has fallen, but the walls endure, holding the silence power once buried. In their breathless stillness, cruelty becomes memory, and memory becomes confession. For walls remember what people forget, and some whispers wait centuries to be heard.